shit. That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Higher Ed Pulse, your Monday morning energizer covering insights and trends in higher ed marketing and enrollment. I'm Mallory Wilsey, bringing over 15 years of ed tech and marketing expertise to your earbuds.
And I'm Seth Odell, joining the Pulse with my own adventures from leading marketing at top universities to founding Kanahoma, one of the industry's fastest growing digital marketing agencies.
Each week, we bring you the kind of insider insights you typically only find over cocktails with your pals at a conference.
It's fast, it's fun, and it's designed for you, the busy higher ed professional.
You're not just listening to another podcast.
You're checking the pulse of higher education.
Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher ed professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. And we're back live at HighEdWeb. I am sitting across from Margaret Hair, the Director of Marketing and Communications at the School of Social Welfare at the University of Kansas. And today, Margaret and I are going to be getting really tactical. We're going to be talking about interviewing tips for marketing stories. So many of us have to do this. We have to generate stories. We have to talk to all sorts of audiences. And Margaret is going to break down goals, audiences, storytelling, and give us a step-by-step guide for how to do these interviews effectively so that they yield the best information. Margaret, I've been talking for too long. How are you? How is your start to HighEdWeb? What's something interesting you've learned today?
Hi, thank you. HighEdWeb is going great. I'm doing well. I've gotten to go on a couple of sessions so far about SEO and content strategy, a really interesting one about civic engagement and communications on campus, so super timely. Yeah, learning a lot.
Amazing. So let's dig into this topic because I know there's a lot more content here than we probably have time for in these short interviews. So interviewing tips for marketing stories. Like I said, a lot of us who work with digital content have to get good at interviewing. So I always like to start with the goals, right? Goals before anything else. So break this down for me. How do you look at goal setting, especially from one audience to the next?
Sure. So often when we're talking about marketing stories, we're thinking about spotlights on members of our community. So that might be a student spotlight, faculty spotlight, a research profile, something like that. So I think about goals the same way I maybe would think about them for a news story, but in a marketing lens. So am I trying to give my audience new information? Am I trying to answer questions that they might have, particularly for prospective students, explain a complex topic or process, or just share a new perspective with the audience? And your audience will really inform that, whether you're thinking about prospective students, current students, maybe you're thinking about peer institutions if you're profiling faculty. So going through that list of goals, determining what one thing you want your story to do will help you decide who to interview and what kinds of questions to ask them during the interview.
Terrific. So let's just place ourselves right in it. Imagine that we are sitting down and talking to a faculty member, or maybe a current student, and I need to prepare for that, right? What is your first tip? What is the first thing that I should do?
Sure. So my first tip is maybe a little obvious, but it's to do a real interview. So when I say that, I mean don't email a list of questions to the person you're interviewing and ask them to send you back written responses. You'll always get a better, more organic interview and ultimately more that you can use if you sit down with that person for an in-person interview, a Zoom interview, or even talking to them by the phone, as long as you're able to record it to make sure that you can get some good long quotes out of the conversation that you're having. A couple of pitfalls for emailed responses. You will often get really long responses. They'll be a lot more rehearsed. You can miss out on things like anecdotes or just more organic type of information that will make the interview more authentic. And they can be hard to cut down if the person that has sent you those responses spent a lot of time putting them together. So you always want to do an actual interview, actually talk to the person. That's a good starting point.
So I'll admit, I'm going to ask you this next question a little selfishly here. I want to learn from you about this answer, but I have to imagine you are in a position where you are conducting these interviews with people who are not used to being interviewed, right? And I'm in that same position all the time too. So what is something that you would recommend to help get that person comfortable and ready to be interviewed so that when you are actually in that moment, you are yielding the best content possible?
Sure. So you want to do some pre-interview work before you actually sit down to interview the person. So often this can happen while you're asking if it's okay to interview them, asking if they want to be spotlighted, and scheduling the time to do that. So either by email, or if you're doing maybe a bunch of the same type of story, you might put together a short survey. But asking for some basic background information like their name, so you make sure you get the right spelling, their pronouns, their official job title, if it's a faculty or staff member, other background kind of questions can get people into the mode of answering questions about themselves. For students, you might ask for their major, year in school, hometown, that sort of thing. And then I also like to share not a full list of the questions that we're planning to ask, but at least a general idea of the types of questions that we might ask so that they can start to think about what they would say, start to form their thoughts so that you'll get the most out of the interview. You also want to give some basic expectations so people know what they're walking into. You don't want to surprise people by recording them on video if they didn't know they were going to be doing that. Also, just give them like a length, how long it's going to take, the format of the interview, and how it'll be used so that they have a sense of where they might see the interview or the spotlight once it's done.
Well, we know the meat of any good interview is having good questions. So what are your pro tips around ensuring that those questions are going to hit the mark?
Sure. To start out, maybe a little obvious, but you want to write questions in advance so that you make sure that you ask all of the things that you were hoping to ask to get the story that meets your goals. So for me, that often starts with a couple of just yes-no verifications. You can follow up on some of that pre-reporting that you did when you're sitting down to do the interview with the person. That'll get them in the mode of answering questions, makes it a little bit more comfortable for them. And then for the primary part of the interview, you really want to focus on open-ended questions. So focus on the how and the why of the story that they're telling you so that you get those authentic answers that are specific to that person and that really tell you why they chose this program, why they do the work they do, what they like about it, what motivates them about it. So a couple of examples. For a student, you might ask something like, tell me about a time you knew that the major you chose was the right one for you. Or what's one thing you hope this degree will make it possible for you to do? Really getting at specific stories, specific motivations that you can include in the story. Once you're in that conversation with the person you're interviewing, that's when you can start to ask follow-up questions. So you've written these great questions in advance. You might go down that list of questions while you're interviewing the person, but you want to leave room to ask for additional details. Maybe give them a chance to talk a little bit more about something. As they start to get their thoughts collected, you might get a better response. If you're, for example, interviewing a faculty member about their research, you might want to ask some clarifying questions to break things down in terms that would work for a general audience. So follow-up questions like, tell me more about, tell me what you meant by, could you say a little bit more about that? And one that I really like, particularly for faculty and researcher interviews, is I'm so curious about, to get them to explain a topic to you in the way that they might explain it to someone that they're teaching about that topic. So definitely don't be afraid to ask follow-up questions during the conversation.
Terrific. The irony of talking to an expert in interviewing as I'm interviewing you is not lost on me. I feel like I need to say, I am so curious about Margaret, so I suspect a lot of times you, as you are recommending, you are doing these interviews through conversation. So whether you're recording that interview on video or just audio, obviously you're going to probably transform that content into a bunch of different modalities and formats. So any recommendations around that component, knowing that you may take that content into website copy or a YouTube short, like who knows, world's your oyster. What are your recommendations?
Sure. So we do this a lot in my school. We have a pretty small team. So when we sit down and do an interview and do all the production behind it, we really want that story to go as far as it can, as many places as we can take it. This is a place where your pre-reporting can really come in handy. So maybe you're doing a student spotlight interview about someone in one of your programs, but in the pre-reporting survey or list of questions that you sent them, you found out that they also did one of your study abroad programs. Maybe you can use that on your study abroad webpage later. Even if it's not going to fit in the initial spotlight, you could ask them a question about their study abroad experience. So having a little bit more information about the person gives you that ability to make the most out of the interview. And then we're always thinking about ways to package things for different channels. So one student interview can really turn into content that you can use across social, across the website, in emails, whatever you need for your storytelling to have that voice represented in. You can really use interviews across a lot of different platforms.
Are you utilizing artificial intelligence at all in your process?
No, not right now anyway. I mean, I think that there are, for example, question writing. You might ask an AI to write a list of questions that get at a certain goal or a certain topic that you're wanting to ask about during the interview. I personally will sometimes use AI for headline writing and things like that, just to start generating ideas. But right now, in our current process, we're not using AI very much in the interview process.
It feels like there's such an opportunity with all the transcripts that you are sitting on to be able to, plop it, for lack of a better word, into ChatGPT or a tool like that and use AI to help pull out themes or create summaries or maybe even give you ideas for content transformation. So I'm going to be really curious to catch up with you at HighEdWeb next year to see if that evolves for you and your team over the course of the next year. Well, Margaret, because I know you have ending the interview with a final question as one of your pro tips, I'm going to ask you that question. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Sure. That is the last question that I typically ask for interviews because people often have been thinking about what they wanted to say. So they might re-answer one of your questions from earlier, or you might have not asked them something that they really want to share that would be interesting. So that's always a good question to end with. The last tip I'll give is though you might be maybe you're doing a bunch of interviews at one time, it's going to take you a while to process them. I always try to put together at least an outline of what that story is going to be right after I interview the person so that I know what I thought was most interesting. If I was going to tell someone about that interview right after that, that's usually what I'll be thinking about in pulling out most interesting things that they told me.
Incredible. Well, Margaret, thank you again for sitting down with me. I so appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. And I'll say I'm sending this episode to my team of creators because I think there's some great pro tips here that we can all learn from. Thank you for so generously sharing your knowledge. If folks are looking to connect with you digitally, where's the best spot to find you?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn You can find me at Margaret Hair. I believe my LinkedIn URL ends with my name, so last name is spelled Hair.
Beautiful. We'll find you there. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Until next time.
The HighEdWeb Pulse is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Brian Gross, Eddie Francis, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.